Alright everyone, buckle up, because my life has turned into a soap opera, and I don't even know how to process it. What started as an innocent DNA test gift turned into the unraveling of my entire existence. I wish I were exaggerating. I wish this was just some bad dream. But note this is my reality. It all started when my older brother and his long-term girlfriend ended things. Now, breakups suck, but people move on, right? Well, apparently, not my parents. You see, my parents took the breakup harder than even my brother did. And not because they cared about his emotional well-being, oh no. They were devastated because, get this, there went their guaranteed chance at grandchildren. My mom specifically lost her mind over it, ranting about how my brother ruined everything and how the family name would die with him. That should have been my first clue that something was off. But I was too busy dealing with my own problems. For over a year, I had been taking care of my dad, who had suffered a major stroke. My social life? Gone. My academic life? Hanging by a thread. Meanwhile, my mother barely lifted a finger to help, too busy wallowing in self-pity over my brother's breakup. I don't know what snapped in me that night, but after a particularly heated fight with my mom, more on that later, I packed my bags and left. My brother let me crash at his apartment, and honestly, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But oh, if only I knew what was coming next. That same night, my brother and I finally decided to take the DNA test kits we had received as gifts from my boyfriend's family. It was one of those fun, casual gifts. Hey, let's see where we come from. Well, fun and casual went out the window real fast. Now, here's where things started to get really suspicious. When my mom found out that I was taking the test too, she freaked out, like beyond normal. She practically begged me not to do it. She kept saying, "It's a waste of time, just let your brother take it," which was weird as hell. Cue my overactive imagination. A crazy thought popped into my head. What if my dad wasn't actually my biological father? It was absurd, right? Just a dumb theory. My parents had been married for decades. But my mom's reaction made the conspiracy theorist in me start connecting dots that probably weren't even there. Still, I took the test. My brother took his. We sent them in, had some laughs, and then forgot about it for a few weeks. Until the results came in. I remember opening the email with my brother, both of us eager to see our ancestry breakdowns. But what we saw instead, half sibling. Not full sibling, half. We sat there in stunned silence, just staring at the screen. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I read and reread the results 100 times, hoping I was seeing it wrong. But I wasn't. I turned to my brother, my mouth dry. What the hell does this mean? He was just as speechless. And then it hit us. My Daydor dad was not my biological father. The room started spinning. I could barely breathe. I had clung to the theory as a joke, something ridiculous, something impossible. But here it was, in black and white. And the worst part? I knew exactly who my biological father was before anyone even told me. See, when I was growing up, there was always one family friend who was a little too involved in my life. He was around all the time, always slipping me extra money, always making sure I was taken care of in ways my parents didn't. I used to think he was just a kind man, a close friend of the family. But in hindsight, it all makes sense. This man who had passed away years ago was my mother's longtime friend. And when I did the math, he got my mother pregnant while she was married to my dad. And she hid it from everyone. I don't even know how to explain what I felt in that moment. Betrayal, grief, anger. It was like I had been living someone else's life this entire time. And my mother knew. She knew the whole time. When I confronted her, she still tried to deny it. But when I showed her the DNA results, she finally broke. She admitted that yes, she had an affair. And yes, she knew there was a possibility I wasn't my father's child. But she had never intended for me to find out. At this point, my brother was fuming. He felt just as betrayed as I did. But things only got worse. Because when we finally broke the news to my dad, he already knew. He had known since I was a child. He had taken a private DNA test when I was a baby, and instead of confronting my mother, he chose to raise me as his own. But clearly, that wasn't enough because over the years, his love and attention had slowly shifted away from me. And now I knew why. I wasn't his. I was the living, breathing proof of my mother's betrayal. I asked him why he never told me, why he let me believe a lie for my entire life. And all he said was, because I didn't want you to hate yourself for something you didn't do. And that destroyed me. So here I am now. My entire identity feels like a lie. My family isn't what I thought it was. My dad, who I still love, despite everything, will never see me as fully his. My mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me, built my entire life on a lie. I feel like a stranger in my own skin. I don't even know how to move forward from this. Should I cut off my mother? Should I keep a relationship with my dad, even though I know the truth? How do I ever come to terms with this? I just needed to get this off my chest. Because right now, I feel like my entire life has been shattered.
I, 33F, always thought my dad, 63M, was a quiet, humble man. He raised me on his own after my mom walked out when I was a baby. He was the kind of man who worked late, never got into drama, and spent his evenings watching television with his wife, 58F, and my half-sister, 23F. We weren't super close, but I respected him, trusted him. Until today. His wife and my sister were out of town for a weekend trip, so I figured I'd stop by to check on him. I had a key, so I let myself in. The moment I stepped into the house, something felt off. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and hair dye. High heels, red stilettos, the stripper kindwear tossed by the door. A half-full glass of wine sat on the coffee table. And then I saw her, a young woman, definitely in her 20s, lounging on my dad's couch wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt. His t-shirt, her legs were bare, and she had a dye brush in her hand, streaks of deep red dripping from her hair. I froze. She just stared at me, completely unfazed, not embarrassed, not alarmed, just waiting. I cleared my throat. Who are you? She smirked. Then, in a thick accent, she said, Sasha. No last name, no explanation. Before I could respond, my dad walked in. The moment he saw me, his face dropped like he had been caught robbing a bank. Oh, he said way too casually, you're here. I folded my arms. Yeah, I am. Who's she? He hesitated, a half second too long. A friend of a friend. Bolsh T. A friend? I asked, glancing at Sasha, who still hadn't moved from the couch. Of who exactly? He named some random guy I'd never heard of. I immediately called his bluff. That's funny because you've never mentioned him before. Dad shifted, rubbing the back of his neck. It's just a favor, okay? She's a refugee. She needed a place to stay for a few nights. Oh, sure. Because refugees always show up in expensive lingerie heels and lounge around half-naked in the houses of men 40 years older than them. I looked at Sasha, who was still watching me like a hawk. There was something off about her. Not scared, not nervous. Confident. Too confident. You're helping a refugee by letting her dye her hair in your house? She needed to change her appearance for personal reasons, Dad said, his voice too quick, too smooth. And that's when it clicked. She wasn't a refugee. She was running from something. Or someone. My heart started pounding. Dad, what is going on? He sighed and glanced at Sasha, then lowered his voice. It's complicated. Nosh T. At that moment, Sasha stood up and stretched, making a point of showing her bare thighs as she did. She wasn't just comfortable here. She owned this space. I swallowed my revulsion. I could have left, should have left, but something inside me screamed that I needed to dig deeper, because this wasn't just some old man midlife crisis fling. This was something worse. I left that night, but I wasn't done. Later that night, I called my sister. She had no idea who Sasha was. The moment I described her, she was just as horrified as me. Dad has no friends like that, she said, and Mom would freak if she found out. That's what I'm saying, I whispered. We decided not to tell their mom yet, not until we knew exactly what was happening. The next day, I drove by his house, and that's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Sasha. getting into the passenger seat of my dad's car with a huge duffel bag slung over her shoulder. And my dad? He was nervous, looking over his shoulder, checking the street before pulling away. I knew, in my gut, that whatever was happening was not legal. I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't ready for what I found. That night I started doing some digging, reverse image searched Sasha's face from a blurry selfie she posted on my dad's Facebook. Yes, he was that dumb. And that's when I found it. An escort website. With her exact photo. Explicit pictures, an old listing, but it was her. I almost threw up. My dad was involved with a sex worker young enough to be my sister, number worse. I kept digging. The website had reviews, and some of them mentioned something horrifying. Trained well. Doesn't speak much English but follows orders. Trained. Like she had been forced into this. That's when I knew. Sasha wasn't just some young girlfriend. She wasn't some innocent woman in a bad situation. She was trafficked. And my father? He was part of it. I haven't told my sister yet, haven't told anyone, but I feel sick. Everything I thought about my dad was a lie. And now, I don't know what to do. I want to confront him, scream at him, call the police, but I don't know if Sasha's a victim or if she's just as deep in it as him. Part of me wants to believe there's a good explanation, but deep down, I know there isn't. I don't know how to look at him anymore. I don't know how to breathe anymore. What the hell do I do?
I, 28F, always told myself I would never get married. Not because I hated love, but because I grew up watching love morph into something hideous. My mother was a prisoner in her own homey father made sure of that. He would belittle her, control every dime she spent, then throw tantrums about how she never wanted to have sex with him. When she finally divorced him, I was 12, and somehow I still got roped into his whining. He told me, his daughter, how miserable his sex life had been. How women just use men and then complain about them. At 12, I barely understood what he meant. By 16, I understood it too well. By the time I was an adult, I was convinced that relationships were just prisons with prettier bars. I watched my friends get into them, watched them struggle, compromise, and lose pieces of themselves until they were just quieter, more exhausted versions of who they used to be. And sex? Sex became this thing that men felt owed to them. The idea of someone nagging me for it, demanding it, or worse, guilting me for not wanting it made my stomach churn. So I stayed away. I had casual flings, sometimes relationships, but the moment a man hinted at entitlement, the "why don't you initiate more," or the "we should be having more sex" comments, I was gone. I refused to be my mother. I refused to be trapped. Then I met Daniel, 31M. He was different, or so I thought. Daniel was the first man who didn't make sex a central topic in our relationship. We went months without doing it, and he never complained. If I wasn't in the mood, he didn't guilt me. If I wanted space, he gave it to me. He made me feel safe. And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe I could do this. Maybe marriage isn't a death sentence. So when he proposed, I said yes. Everything was perfect until about 6 months after the wedding. It was slow, almost unnoticeable at first. Little comments. Joke. Babe, remember when we used to be passionate? Or the classic, we're married now, you don't have to be shy about it. I brushed it off at first, but then came the touches. The insistent hands on my waist when I was cooking. The way he'd hover around me. The size of disappointment if I pulled away. Then, one night, he said it outright. We don't have sex enough. Something inside me snapped. I stared at him, my heart pounding. Not enough? We had sex once a week. Sometimes twice, if I was ovulating and actually felt like it. But apparently, that wasn't enough. The worst part? The look on his face. That same disappointed, resentful look my father used to have. I went cold. I told him I needed space, and I left to stay with my best friend for a few nights. And that's when I found out the truth. She hesitated at first, but then she showed me the messages. Messages from him, to her, and to other women. He had been venting about our sex life for months, complaining about how I was a cold fish, how he had sacrificed so much by being with someone who wasn't as sexual as him, how he deserved better. Deserved. That word echoed in my head. He deserved something from me? My body? My time? I felt sick. The man who had promised to love and respect me had been resenting me in secret, playing the poor, suffering husband act. I packed my bags and went home. Not to him, but to our shared apartment. I took everything that was mine and left. I didn't even tell him. I just texted him. "You don't deserve anything from me. We're done." And then I blocked him. Now, I'm sitting in a hotel room typing this out, wondering if I ever even knew him at all. If men like him like my father Ray, all the same underneath. If marriage is always just a slow descent into expectation instead of love, I don't know if I'll ever date again. But what I do know is this: I will never be someone's obligation. And no one will ever make my body feel like a chore again. Oh, everyone asking, yes, I've contacted a lawyer. No, I don't care about his side of the story.